If your team does not have the ability to do micro adjustments based on trends, you're going to be left behind. Technology and what's possible is changing so rapidly. The future is these micro adjustments. Welcome, everyone. Episode number 18 of The Innovative Seller. Talking about business planning is not the sexiest of topics, right? Whether I was a rep and I was trying to think about how I was going to plan to get my number, or as I moved into more of a VP, C-level, how do you think about multiple years out? These are big topics that are very difficult. And, if you look at the classic, I've sat through these kind of, 3-year plan and your 10-year vision. I feel like today, and for a lot of you in sales who are even trying to think about 10 months from now at the end of the year, the ability to do your 2 to 3 year strategy, or even for a lot of reps, like how to forecast out your year starting today, is harder than ever. And so in episode 18, I'm going to talk about, is true long-term planning a thing of the past? If you think about how quickly our world is evolving, you think about technology, think about how far we've come in the last 2 years with AI. We are entering a world where things are evolving at a speed that is so difficult to predict. And so even me, for my company, we are doing 6-month projections, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. We were sitting down for planning, late 2024, and it's like, do you know what's going to happen in September of next year? I don't know what's going to happen in September of next year. What happens when ChatGPT comes out with the 5.0 or the 6.0 model? Like, I don't know. What happens, maybe there's a robot that's doing this stuff. So, we're going to talk today about the strategy. And so for a lot of you, if you're a frontline, if you're in sales, I want you to apply a lot of this to like how you think about your year. And are you, thinking about things on a quarterly basis, putting together plays, putting together strategies that are a little bit more dynamic. I wish we could just do, that 2 or 3 year set it and forget it, but I just don't think it's happening anymore. So today I'm going to talk through 3 core areas for you. Okay, number 1, should we keep looking more than a year out? Right, I'm going to talk about pros and cons of having kind of a 2 or 3 year strategy if you're a rep, planning for your whole year up front and just trying to execute that. I'll talk about specifically the pros of quarterly planning. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper there. Slack has adopted this model. So for a lot of you who probably use Slack, I'll talk a little bit about what they've done. And I think it's an interesting case study for a lot of people to consider. And last, but certainly not least, hopefully you are subscribed to the AI-powered Seller podcast with myself and Kevin Dorsey. If not, make sure, click in the link in the show notes to subscribe to that podcast as well. Obviously, you're here. Make sure to subscribe to the Innovative Seller podcast, where we dive a little bit more into sales strategies. But I feel like I have to talk about AI's impact on long-term strategy. It's just moving so quickly. There's a pace that's kind of ridiculous that, for me as a CEO of multiple companies, I feel like I spend a lot of my day keeping up to just get to parity and without even moving forward. So I'll talk a little bit about my journey as well. So, but first, before we jump into some of the sales trends and tech trends, we always have our DM question of the week. So if you're tuning in for the first time, this is where you drop in the comments here on YouTube, or if you're on LinkedIn, you go ahead, you shoot me a DM, and we pull in your DMs, right? So we answer your questions about topics that are relevant. I usually try to just get back to you in general, but make sure to subscribe to the channel. If this is your first time tuning in every couple of weeks, and we've got little mini episodes dropping all the time. We talk about sales trends. We talk about what's happening. How do I keep you at the forefront, based on, myself and my company's work with, hundreds of companies every year. So excited that you're here and excited to dive into today's episode. But first, we have our DM question of the week. Mr. Ziggy, what is our DM question of the week?
This week, we have a very interesting DM question, and it is, how can I encourage my sales team to think about the short-term, mid-term, and long-term plan for the year? It feels like they're always in firefight mode, and of course, yes, we do need short-term growth, but I'm worried that they aren't playing or worried about the long game.
I think every sales leader probably says this, and every sales rep's like, yes, please. How do I do this? So I talk about a principle in the book. If you haven't picked up the book, that's step 1, right? So if you're watching the channel, pick up the book. Came out in April. Make sure to subscribe to the community as well too. As a part of the Innovative Seller community, we've got a lot of different kind of courses and talk tracks on a lot of these topics. But I'd introduce a principle in the book, and it's something that I kind of live my life by. I call it 80-15-5. And what that means is 80% of my time, and I'm pretty meticulous about this. I look at my calendar I've got every Sunday it says 2 weeks out. And 80% of my time is spent on things that are going to impact myself, my life in the near term. So let's call it next 3 months. 15% of my time are things that might not impact me 3 to 9 months down the road. And then 5% of my time, which is, an hour a week or so, I'm looking at things that, I need to start to kind of put in motion today that might have an impact, in 9 to 12 months or further. And so I think you have to dedicate time. And, you as a leader, it is your job, or you as a rep, it's not just your leader's job, it's your job too. You need to have the time dedicated, and you need to keep it pure. Right. So I know, look, I'm going to run this play. I talk a lot about LinkedIn nurturing. If you go check out episode 17, I talked about, kind of social media as the first touch point. I might not have the right post to interact with Jake the very first time. But if I'm playing that medium term game, guess what? I've been doing it now for a couple of months. Now I'm on comment number 3. Boom. Now timing's right. So I think you have to budget the time. If you don't budget time for short, medium, and long term, you're just going to get caught on the hamster wheel. I hate the hamster wheel personally. So that's what I got for you. It's actually really that simple, is just try that out. We're still in the new year, 2025 here. You got plenty of year left. Try that out. 2 or 3 hours a week dedicated to some midterm learning. That's where I do, for me, that's demos. I take a lot of software demos on latest and greatest sales tech. And that's kind of what I bucket in my mid-tier time. My long-term time, I do a mix. Once a month, I have a bucket list review. So I review my bucket list once a month. I also review my 3 to 6 month goals on a weekly basis. So just whatever the right things are for you. Maybe you're spending 15 minutes every day just nurturing people on Sales Navigator, right? But you got to have it. You got to have it blocked out. I don't know of any other way. So that's my DM. Make sure you drop your question in the comments here. Happy to go deeper on 80-15-5 at some point as well too. And make sure, again, as we jump into this, we're going to talk sales trends. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Like the video, share it with your team, share it with somebody who needs a little sales pump up here. So let's jump into it. So first trend, let's talk about the 2 to 3 year plan for my leaders, and for my reps, let's talk about trying to plan a year in advance. Look, we've all been taught that's how you're supposed to do it, right? It's this big push. It's the beginning of the year or the year before. You put together this big elaborate plan, and we're going to do this and this and this and this. And then, about 3 to 6 months, we get a new president. We get, something else happens. There's inflation. And that plan, we kind of keep going back to it. Even though the reality says, well, things have changed. And it's not, look, here's the thing. Most of the time, we're not talking about having to take the plan, wad it up, throw it in the trash. But we are talking about building in some agility, right? Building in some of the agility to say, okay, based on what we know today. And by the way, this shouldn't be wild swings. Right? Agility isn't, I was a 100 sprinter and now I should be an 800 meter runner for all my track people out there. Right? I like what Spotify, for instance, they've ditched the long-term forecasting model. They have a more flexible data-driven strategy. They adjust their sales approach quarterly to respond to market trends. And this allows them to capitalize on real-time insights. Right? Again, just imagine. Give me an example of what you're doing when you lock in this annual plan. Let's say you start to see some leading indicators. Hey, you know what? Joe is, or, man, for some reason, I'm starting to win a lot more deals here. I need to fix up, or I need to triple down on that, right? Or, hey, you know what? We had this nice little line item. Oh, good. We're overperforming forecasts for this one product. No, we should stop the press. We should stop. What's happening here? How do we make that thing explode? Right? And so I think because we're locked in, we're like, oh, we're ahead of pace for the year. We're behind pace for the year. Because we're not looking at things more agile, we're missing a ton of trends. A ton. Look at your marketing count. All my sellers out there, marketing, man, they're looking at data and performance on a weekly basis, bi-weekly, monthly. They're making changes. They're doubling and tripling down. So to me, I think that the 2 to 3 year forecast is helpful for your board of directors, but not for running your business. I think you can have ideas of what you want to do. And I think once you start to find very repeatable channels that produce in a very similar way, then you can do that. But other than that, I think we have to have a little more agile model. And if you're a rep, what that really means for you is you put in place your plan for the year. But man, every quarter, again, what I tell you, 80, 15, 5. You maybe have 4 or 5 hours every quarter. You're looking at your trends, what's working. Maybe you're looking at other top performers. What did they do? And now how am I going to tweak my strategy for the next quarter, right? Or next month, depending on your sales cycle. So that's my number 2 piece here. So I'm going to get into the quarterly sales planning, right? Why I think this is a much more effective, like I said, at Scaled, we've literally, we did not do a forecast past July. We didn't do one. Right? We thought we have an idea of what we want to do past July, but we'll finalize that probably like April, May, because things are evolving so quickly, right? We're in a business with 30 plus people. You might have a much bigger business, which means your swings can be, even, you can start to feel them earlier because you have more people doing them. So what I like is what Slack does is they do a quarterly review. That's the standard. Right. So for them, they pivot their sales strategy every 3 months based on fresh customer insights, market conditions, similar to what we talked about with Spotify. They keep a very close eye on consumer behavior as well, too. And then they have mechanisms in place for change. Right. And I think that I feel like sales is just, we're so used to these big sales, transformations every 3 years. The future is these micro adjustments. If your team does not have the ability to do micro adjustments based on trends, you're going to be left behind. Because again, the technology and what's possible is changing so rapidly. I talked last episode about Gen Z and their behavior and consumer behavior, all around. So for a lot of you out there, if you're looking to get started, one trend that I would suggest is just moving to more of a quarterly strategy. Right, that's what we do. We implemented a system called EOS, which is based on a book called Traction's Entrepreneur Operating System. Because of that, you might call them OKRs. We call them rocks. But we are pretty ruthless about our rocks. It has to be in with a certain time frame. We carry them over if we didn't hit them, but we are pretty ruthless about timing them to be quarterly. And I think that that's the future. The future is how do I try to jam as much? There's another book. Man, what is it? What is that book called? I'll find a link to it, but it talks about breaking your year, I think, into like 60-day sprints. Somebody else, you might comment, you might tell somebody here, but it talks about this idea of shorter sprint cycles. So instead, 12, I think it's called the 12-week year. That's what it is, 12-week year. And it talks about this concept of, doing these little mini sprints just because like things are changing so quickly. So we'll link to that book as well too. The 12-week year for you. But that's the future, my friends, is I want you to think about this idea, whether you're a frontline rep, a director, a manager, a VP, a CRO, a CEO, you have to have mechanisms in place to adapt faster. You just do. And I think a lot of people, it's just like, well, let's wait it out till that planning happens. And again, instead of making this huge disruptive event that happens once a year, think about how you can make it more of a consistent rhythm. I talk about in the book the 4 C's, right? The 4th C is consistent process optimization. And this is certainly a part of that, okay? So just think about that, my friends. So that's my sales trends. Those are the trends in building and scaling your team, your book of business, etc. If you got value there, hopefully you had some takeaways, whether it's 80, 15, 5, or maybe some of the topics around consistent optimization. Make sure to like the video. I really, really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'm going to spend the last part of this episode diving into some trends. As usual, if you're interested in AI, make sure to subscribe to the AI-Powered Seller podcast, where myself and Kevin Dorsey, we only talk about AI and trends, etc. But today's going to be fun. I'm going to talk about what is the impact of AI on short and long-term strategy. So let's get into it. All right. So when we think about long-term strategies, I mean, put this in perspective. November of 2022 is when ChatGPT came out. November of 2022. How many of you, I'd love to, you can drop it in the comments. How many of you use ChatGPT or a tool like it more than 2 hours a week, right? That's me for sure, at least. And again, I want you to imagine this. This is a tool that didn't exist 2 years ago. And so again, when we think about things like productivity, the word of the day with a lot of the PE firms and venture capital firms that we work with and CEOs I talk to is do more with less. Well, one of the most important ways to do that is to increase the productivity of your team, right? To increase the productivity of what they're putting out there. And so if you imagine, even a year ago, custom GPTs had come out a year ago at this point. But, we didn't have our suite of custom GPTs. We didn't have, the kind of productivity suite we have now around discovery call prep, annual report summarizer. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you do use ChatGPT, take a look at the link. And we've got 10 custom GPTs that are totally productivity based. But there's a lot of other ones out there, right? HubSpot, for example, I know for a fact, like they're using AI and, we've got a tool called Performance Pulse where, look, we're looking at a lot of these data sets and being able to really increase productivity faster than ever. And so that's another thing I think a lot about when I think about this long-term planning. And if you're a rep, how are you thinking about technology helping you to get more productive? Do you know how productive you are? You know your quota probably. But do you know your efficiency at generating, deals to step this or deals to step this? Probably not. So for me, a lot of companies, step one is understand your productivity metrics, right? It sounds kind of boring and you're like, well, what can I really gain? But if you really think about this, you're like, okay, I am XYZ efficient at getting to here. And I measure that by time and I measure it maybe by dollar size, something like that, right? So I want you to imagine a world where you're like, all right, it takes me 4 hours to generate 10,000 in pipeline. I'm just making up a number here. Man, how can I get 5% better? How can I get 6% better? Right? And so for a lot of you out there, I want you to think about how you can use technology to track what you're doing. And then on the flip side, how you can use AI and custom GPTs and tools like them to increase your productivity at generating more with less. So yes, there's a lot of tools out there. Like I said, HubSpot's got some cool stuff that they're doing right now. Some of our partners as well too have got some pretty cool things. We'll put some links in there for you. But for a lot of people, if you're thinking about this short, mid, long-term strategy, again, think about where technology can help you. So if you're mandated, you're like, look, man, our productivity isn't where we've got a lot of clients. This was a big theme I feel like for end of last year, we closed a bunch of engagements where it's like, our customer acquisition cost is going up, just costs more. And then you go, okay, well, how productive are your reps? Like, I don't know. Okay, well, that's where we got to start. How do we get them, spending more time doing the things that add value and less time, doing things like research or unnecessary data entry. That's another one. There's tools, Gong, for example. You can have it listen to calls and it will automatically pull the things out and log it to CRM. I'm going to save my reps 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe an hour or two a week. So again, a lot of you need to think about how are you using technology to increase rep productivity? Okay, there's a lot of those things. And again, going back to my optimization cycles. Okay, you got to couple these two things together. It says, great. So every 3 months, I'm looking at where are we stacking up here? How can technology help me? Right. And so those to me are kind of the big ones, right? If you think about how you're going to be more effective here in 2025, how you're going to do more with less, you have to think about how to use AI to automate the mundane, right? You got to know your metrics and you got to look at them on a consistent basis. And so that's really the theme for today's episode. The theme for today's episode is, my friends, our world is changing too quickly to set it and forget it. A 2-year, a 3-year, a 5-year strategy you have to have put in place. And again, we talk about it in the book. If you haven't picked up the book, please check out the book. We talk about literally this process of consistent performance optimization because teams have got to move faster. Right? You can't look at we're going to look at our outbound performance every 6 to 12 months. It's like at that point, I kid you not, this is real data. We have a client, we plugged in Performance Pulse. If you don't know about Performance Pulse, if you use one of the larger sales engagement platforms, we'll link to it in the show. They had an email set. They sent it out 63,000 emails and had 38 replies total. Their average open rate was like 12%. Why did somebody not stop this email at 500? Why did not somebody stop one of these emails, right? Or fix a subject line? And it's because we don't have the mechanisms in place for rapid optimization. So my friends, if you are thinking about it, whether you're a frontline seller, baking in the time to make yourself more successful consistently, if you're a sales leader, how are you building, or you're a CEO, you're building a company, what is your rhythm to do more consistent review of your forecast, optimization, understanding productivity, and understanding ways that technology can help you? And so hopefully in today's episode, you got a couple of really good takeaways, some tactical things that you can do right now. That's my goal really for this show. And, if you follow my content in general, is to give you guys some tactical things. Put that stuff in your calendar. That alone, that's a good step one, right? And make sure if you did get value to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your sales team, share it with somebody, who you think, could benefit from this. Maybe you've got a rep who's struggling with time management. Maybe you've got a rep who, is struggling to hit their top of funnel numbers. Maybe you've got a RevOps team that's struggling to make an impact because they don't have the right data. Get them thinking about these things. So that's what I got for y'all. That's episode number 18 of The Innovative Seller. Hopefully, all of you are walking away with a lot of really interesting takeaways. And I can't wait to see you all on the next episode here in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everyone.